Have you ever wondered how a single word could send shockwaves through the political landscape, leaving even a former president reeling? Imagine a scenario where, in the midst of economic discussions about unemployment rates, say, figures like 4.9% and 5%, or even a cautiously optimistic 28 to 29.9% rate that might encourage constructive monetary policy alone, word becomes the catalyst for chaos. In one instance, a simple term from a late-night comedian managed to unravel the composure of Donald J. Trump, spiraling his reactions into a frenzy that left the world watching in disbelief. It all began when John Oliver, known for his razor-sharp wit on Last Week Tonight, unleashed a verbal grenade that was destined to ignite a storm. Just a few days earlier, Oliver had taken a swipe at Trump with nothing more than a single, seemingly innocuous word. Yet, that one word, sad, was enough to send the ex-president into a tailspin. To put it simply, Trump's repeated use of this term on Twitter had become his go-to method for dismissing anything he deemed unworthy, including everything from his allies to news reports he didn't like. And now, in an ironic twist of fate, the very word he had so often deployed was turned against him. Picture the scene. The audience at Last Week Tonight was on edge, waiting to see what kind of verbal acrobatics Oliver would perform next. The tension in the room was palpable. Then, in a moment that can only be described as theatrical, Oliver dropped the S-bomb with a crisp delivery. Sad. One point, Trump has made it clear that reality is not important to him. It was a short, stinging observation, one word that encapsulated a lifetime of controversies and falsehoods. And yet, that word proved to be far more potent than one might initially assume in the immediate aftermath of Oliver's comment. Donald Trump's reaction was swift and explosive. It wasn't a measured response from a seasoned politician, but rather an outburst that resembled the tantrums of a petulant child, discovering that their favorite snack was suddenly unavailable. Almost immediately, Trump took to Twitter, firing off a series of tweets that ranged from wildly imaginative to downright childish. His first tweet was a direct jab at the comedian himself. "John Loser, more like sad." This was followed by a string of tweets that not only attacked Oliver, but also touched on a host of other grievances. For those who had been following the political drama, it was clear that Trump was not simply defending himself. He was attempting to launch an assault on his detractors. His tweets were punctuated with exclamation marks, capital letters, and bizarre claims that veered wildly from one topic to another. At one point, he even boasted about the size of his inauguration crowd, dismissed accusations of voter fraud without presenting any concrete evidence, and went so far as to insist that his hands were not little despite the persistent ridicule. This wasn't just a series of random insults. It was a full-blown Twitter storm that lasted into the early hours of the morning, a time when most people are dreaming of more mundane things, like tacos or global peace. As the tweets continued to pour out, the spectacle only grew more surreal. Trump's response became a series of increasingly bizarre rants, culminating in an impromptu press conference. One could hardly imagine a more unpresidential moment than a former head of state standing before a room full of reporters, seemingly more interested in venting his personal grievances than addressing the pressing issues of the day. Instead of discussing policies or the state of the economy, Trump focused almost exclusively on lambasting John Oliver, British comedian, no less, and elaborated on his perceived grievances for a good 45 minutes. During that press conference, the absurdity reached its zenith. Rather than fielding questions about serious matters, Trump embarked on a diatribe against Oliver. He labeled the comedian as unfunny, which was particularly ironic coming from a man who had, over the years, found amusement in belittling reporters and even individuals with disabilities. The barrage of insults continued as Trump repeatedly mispronounced Oliver's name and derided his nationality by calling him British gas and other nonsensical variants. It was a verbal free-for-all, punctuated by Trump's notorious falsehoods, like his persistent claims that the weather during his inauguration was misrepresented or that there had been widespread voter fraud, none of which were substantiated by any real evidence throughout this chaotic sequence of events. One cannot help but marvel at how a single word could serve as the spark that ignited such a dramatic response. Trump's fixation on sad was not a random occurrence, but rather a reflection of how deeply his persona had come to rely on that particular term. It had become his shorthand for dismissing critics, for invalidating inconvenient truths, and for characterizing anything he disliked. When Oliver echoed that word back at him, it was as if Trump's carefully constructed image was suddenly and irreparably tarnished. In that moment, his entire world, a world that many thought was built on the edifice of unwavering confidence, began to crumble like a house of cards caught in a violent storm. The spectacle wasn't confined merely to Twitter or at the press conference. Rumors began to circulate about other potential outbursts and even more bizarre scenarios that might follow. Some speculated that if Trump's tweets were the result of a botched predictive text algorithm, then perhaps we could soon see headlines like "Trump declares war on Greenland, claims it's too green," or even absurd policies like banning stairs in favor of gold-plated escalators. While these were, of course, hyperbolic fantasies, they underscored the sheer unpredictability of the situation. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the smallest pebble, a single, carefully chosen word, had triggered an avalanche of absurdity that left the nation and the world grappling to understand what had just happened, adding another layer to the farce was the involvement of Melania Trump. As Trump raged on about John Oliver and other imagined slights, reports emerged suggesting that Melania might be seeking a way out of the increasingly untenable situation. Rumors circulated, however unfounded, that she was looking into how to divorce a president for dummies, or searching for industrial-strength earplugs to block out the constant din of her husband's tirades. Whether these stories held any truth or were merely the product of a wild imagination, they added a further note of surreal humor to an already bizarre episode in American political theater. As the night wore on, and as the press conference reached its ludicrous conclusion, one final set of words from Trump left everyone both bewildered and amused. His parting remarks, mumbling about terms like CF Bigley and huge, left the press corps wondering if they had just witnessed a cryptic code, a neurological misfire, or simply the consequence of too many Diet Cokes. Every absurdity that had been spewed during the night seemed to mirror his previous tweets, as if he were performing a backwards greatest hits montage of his most infamous moments. The audience, both in the room and watching from home, was left questioning, was this real life or merely a satirical dreamscape where the rules of logic no longer applied? In the end, what does all of this tell us about the state of modern political TS? As the modern political discourse, is it possible that the smallest gesture, a single word uttered on a late-night comedy show, could lead to a cascade of events so dramatic that it undermines the authority of one of the most powerful men in the world? As surreal as it might sound, this episode serves as a stark reminder that even in a landscape dominated by grand narratives and epic policy debates, sometimes the tiniest details, like a single word, can have monumental consequences. The entire incident is a potent illustration of how fragile public personas can be, especially when they are built on a foundation of bravado and hyperbolic self-importance. Trump's meltdown, triggered by a seemingly insignificant word, underscores the truth that sometimes even the most seemingly trivial remarks can cause a ripple effect, turning carefully managed narratives into chaotic spectacles. It is a comedy of errors, a political satire played out in real time, where the line between humor and tragedy blurs into an indistinguishable haze. So, what does the future hold if such incidents continue? Could we see more instances where a single tweet, a solitary word, or a fleeting moment of levity has the power to dismantle the carefully cultivated image of a public figure? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: the Trump circus, with all its absurdities and unpredictable outbursts, is far from over. Rumors abound of further dramatic episodes, whether it be a hypothetical showdown with another public figure like Michelle Obama, or another round of bizarre policy proclamations that promise to keep the audience both entertained and perpetually on edge. In conclusion, as we sit back and watch this ongoing drama, let us remember that sometimes it takes just one word to set off a chain reaction. The fact that John Oliver's simple remark could send a former president spiraling into a frenzy reminds us that even in the grand theater of politics, the smallest stone can indeed trigger the largest avalanche. And as we continue to witness this spectacle, we are left to ponder. In a world where even a single word can hold such explosive power, what will be the next spark that ignites the conflagration of political absurdity?